Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Very Cold Lasagna podcast. I'm your host, DylanLasagna, and this is episode number 208 of this icy yet spicy podcast with all the filthy casual takes on the world of sports. And in this episode, we're continuing along with our 2024 NFL season preview month on the podcast. And in this part 6 of our 2024 season preview month, we're going down south. The AFC South specifically, as we look at the 4 teams that reside in that division in this episode. So in case you missed the other 5 parts of our season preview month, which were the 4 NFC divisions that we already covered, the West, the North, the South, and the East, and then the AFC division that we've already covered that started the AFC side, which was the AFC East. Make sure after this episode, go and check out all 5 of those episodes in case you missed any of the NFL divisions that we already covered in the past. And as always, make sure if you haven't already, make sure you smash the subscribe button if you aren't subscribed on YouTube. If you're watching it there, make sure you smash the like button and leave a comment down below with your own takes on whichever episode topic that you are watching. And in this instance, with this episode, the 4 teams in the AFC South. If you're listening to this on any audio platform that Very Cold Lasagna is available on, whether it be Apple Podcasts, Spotify, you name it, make sure you rate and review the show 1 to 5 stars. Any sort of review will certainly help me in any way, shape, or form. And then make sure you follow the show on social media, on Twitter and Instagram at Very Cold Lasagna. And as always, make sure you share this with your friends, share this with your neighbor, share this with a stranger, or maybe with your coworkers, whether it's at school or at work or wherever it may be. Make sure you spread the good, the bad, the ugly. Whether you're a sports fan or not a sports fan, make sure you spread all the good and the bad, the ugly about this podcast called Very Cold Lasagna. That being said, I don't really have any updates in regards to training camp around the league at this time right now. But if I happen to miss something or if there's anything significant, please let me know in the comments on YouTube. Send something my way on social media. If you're listening to this on audio, it's at Very Cold Lasagna on Twitter and Instagram. I would really appreciate it, and I'll catch it up in the next episode. That being said, let's talk about the AFC South. The 4 teams that we're talking about down south on the AFC side of things. When I talked about this division last year, I thought this is going to be the other, if not one of the other, weakest divisions in the NFL. That other one being the NFC South. And I think probably the NFC East as well, if I remember correctly when I previewed these teams last year. But in terms of the AFC South, there wasn't really a lot going on with this division because when I looked at the AFC South, there was certainly some promise with at least 2 of these teams. But with the one division leader at top, it was going to be a cakewalk for a certain all-elite team to the division title because, well, the rest of the division, when I looked at it on paper going into the 2023 season, they were going to go into a rebuild. And one of those teams in particular, they were going to be well on their way to a rebuild next year. But as the season progressed and when it actually unfolded, that certain all-elite team collapsed down the stretch. And in suddenly, out of nowhere, came a surging team in H-Town, well ahead of schedule of the rebuild they were going through, and ended up taking the AFC South division title. Who would have known? Who would have known? And not only did they take the division title, but they ended up going further into the playoffs than most people expected. They actually did pretty good for themselves. So even though they ended up losing in the semifinals, their future is so much brighter than I even expected. Like, they're so well ahead of schedule. They put the rest of the NFL on notice, and here we are in 2024. So much promise with this certain team. So along with this surging team in H-Town, there's another indie promotion that's on the rise as well. While you even also consider the other team in Nashville that's beginning their rebuild. And yeah, well, they have their steps along the way, but they're building these teams are building themselves up to catch up to the certain all elite team that led the division the previous year in 2022. So as the season approaches going into this fall, you have at least 3 of these 4 teams that have a very good chance to win the AFC South. And from the looks of it, this division is going to be, in contrast to the previous years, pretty competitive, if you ask me. So let's take a look at why that is with a look at the AFC South division. So kicking off part 6 of our 2024 NFL season preview month is a team that's going to be undergoing a Music City rebuild down in Nashville. And that team is none other than the Tennessee Titans. Titans, they had several key players either leaving in free agency, or they had conversations about trades, or a lot of their players were just aging in general last year in the offseason. So going into 2023, they expectedly were going to have a down year. And sure enough, as the season wore along, they ended up having a down year as they prepared for what was going to be significant change in the next offseason, which was this past offseason. They went 6-11. Ryan Tannehill ended up being replaced mainly due to injury by Will Levis, and Will Levis did okay for himself. He was a mixed bag, but that's to be expected with this kind of supporting group. But nonetheless, the Titans, they went 6-11. They were going to undergo significant change in the offseason as they were going to get ready for what was going to be a rebuild of sorts for this team. So starting with the first phase of this rebuild was a surprising change at head coach. A little bit of a surprise, I say, because Mike Vrabel wasn't honestly that bad of a head coach, but I guess they wanted to go in a different direction with whoever is going to be at quarterback. Well, I guess, yeah, the main guy was Will Levis, but you never knew. You never know because you still had Malik Willis there. So anyway, they replaced Mike Vrabel with former Bengals offensive coordinator Brian Callahan as head coach. So he was the one that helped out Joe Burrow. Now he gets a new project in Will Levis, who's most likely going to be the starting quarterback. But yeah, again, interesting decision that they replaced Mike Vrabel. Sure, he didn't have the best years after leading the Titans to the AFC Championship in 2019 and then eventually getting the top seed in 2021. But it was a kind of curious case there, why they let him go. And then another key move that they made is that they traded for corner L'Jarius Sneed of the Chiefs in return for a 7th-round pick in this year's draft and then a 3rd-round pick in next year's draft. So they really bolstered their secondary with this move. You know, a passing defense that has struggled in the last few years, but now it gets a big boost with a proven corner in Sneed. So pretty good move if you ask me. So with the Titans, it's pretty expected for this year that you're not really going to compete for a playoff spot, barring some magic, as we've seen with a certain team within this division. But to temper expectations for this specific purpose, your goal for this year, if you're Tennessee, is, as with any other team doing a rebuild, is that you want to at least show some positive signs. You want to give your fans some hope in year one of your rebuild. You want to show some positive progress in the first year of your rebuild and why you should have fans believing that year two could be better. So looking at some of the moves that they made in the offseason, both in free agency and the draft, they lost a good amount of players, but and as a matter of fact, it was time to let them go anyway. Like running back Derrick Henry to the Baltimore Ravens, it was well apparent that in the season finale that this was going to be his last game as a Titan. So that ended up being the case a couple months later when he went over to sign as a free agent to the Ravens. They also let go Andre Dillard, the tackle to the Green Bay Packers, and they also let their center go to the Miami Dolphins as well. And then on the opposite side of the ball, they let Denico Autry go to the Texans, and so did, surprisingly, Azeez Al-Shaair. I mentioned in my season recaps that they should have made it a little bit more priority to re-sign Al-Shaair, but they didn't. That was a little bit of a surprise move there that they didn't make a commitment to sign him. Now he's on the division rival. Interesting move there. And then, of course, they let go Ryan Tannehill, who remains a free agent, but it was time to move on for him because he's been getting injured in the last 2 seasons, and his play has kind of gone downhill ever since he signed that big fat contract. So replacing all those pieces is running back Tony Pollard from the Dallas Cowboys. He had a down year last year because he broke his leg in the divisional game against the 49ers just several months prior to the season when the season started, and he didn't look the same. So maybe when he's completely healthy, he'll be more effective. But the big moves they made were at receiver, getting Calvin Ridley from the Jaguars and getting a third receiver in Tyler Boyd. That should significantly help Will Levis in his development, and so should some moves at the offensive line. Getting a good center in Lloyd Cushenberry from Denver, and then defensively, linebacker Kenneth Murray from the Chargers, and then corner Chidobe Awuzie from the Bengals. So big moves in the secondary with Chidobe Awuzie and L'Jarius Sneed. Those are 2 shutdown corners right there. But the work didn't stop there because when you look at the draft, they continued to address their biggest weaknesses with the offensive line, with J.C. Latham from Alabama, and then linebacker Cedric Gray from North Carolina, and then also from North Carolina, Jarvis Brownlee, and then in the trenches, Tavondre Sweat from Texas. So when you look at the Tennessee Titans this past offseason, yes, they have expected rebuild ahead, but they made plenty of upgrades all around. Because look at the moves that I mentioned, and there are several areas last year and in the year prior where they were so bad that the Titans were pretty much going nowhere. The Titans, on paper at least, they upgraded various spots just like that. Will Levis' supporting cast is going to be better. It features Tony Pollard, and then you had last year's rookie breakout, Ty J. Spears, as well as the receiving position. That offensive attack should be a lot better with Calvin Ridley there, Tyler Boyd there, and then don't forget, you also have DeAndre Hopkins. Sure, he's older, but he was the most effective player in that lacking offense. So you can't discount him as well. And then the offensive line. It was terrible in the last 2 years, but now it remains to be seen if it'll be better with all these new additions. But hey, at least they properly addressed it in some form. So we'll see how effective it will be this coming season. Defensively, they addressed the problematic secondary by grabbing, again, the two top corners from their respective teams, both whom are going to be extremely difficult to take down for opposing quarterbacks. So this team is already improved despite a rebuild ahead. So looking at some of the key games coming up for these new look Titans this season, you look at the first game on the road against the Chicago Bears, who are also going to be donning a little bit of a new look at quarterback with Caleb Williams. So an interesting first road test there for Brian Callahan and Will Levis. And then you go home to face Aaron Rodgers and the New York Jets. Another interesting test there. And then a couple weeks later, you get a division game against the Indianapolis Colts. We'll see how the Titans are by that point, and especially much later down the season when they play the Houston Texans in Houston. So with all that being said, with all these additions made, can Will Levis take the next step in year 2? Now, when I talked about Will Levis in my season recap, there are some things I liked and some things I didn't like. Now, some of that attributed to the bad offensive line, but Levis, I liked the how he expanded the passing attack. He took some big downfield risks, but then there were times where he looked a little uncomfortable, but it's a little expected when he was still a raw quarterback, that it was still a rookie. But let's see how he'll do with these new additions, better protection, and an offensive-minded head coach. So it'll be interesting how he takes the next step this coming fall and as the weeks progress going into this season. So for the Titans, they blew things up this past offseason, but made some really nice upgrades to go along with it, especially with the supporting cast around Levis, some parts of their defense. But, Titans fans still need to remember, though, that the expectation of the goal is actual progress rather than hopes of a fake playoff berth. I mean, that's not to say that, maybe Will Levis will be off the charts, and then the Titans could go on an actual playoff run. But, not everyone's discern the H-Town team that's well ahead of their rebuild. But, maybe they could prove me wrong. Maybe they could prove me wrong. We'll see. There's plenty of talent on this team, but every case is different, because considering the fact they have an extremely difficult schedule for the first half of the year, which would likely derail a lot of those hopes anyway. But who knows? Maybe they could prove me wrong. So this year, for the most part, should be about what the identity of these Tennessee Titans are, and whether Brian Callahan at head coach, Will Levis at quarterback are going to be the right guys to lead the ship in this rebuild in the Music City. Next up, let's talk about a certain indie promotion up north that goes by the name of the Indianapolis Colts. So last year, the Indianapolis Colts were oh so close, but just not quite enough, because 2023 initially was supposed to be about the development of rookie quarterback Anthony Richardson, who looked pretty good in the games that he played. Unfortunately, he also got injured in those games that he played, every single game, which is pretty rough for a rookie quarterback. And eventually, he got lost 5 games in that he played because of a shoulder injury that he suffered. He had a lot of promise if he had played for the rest of the season, but unfortunately, he just got banged up in every game that he played, which is rough. It's rough for a Colts team that really wanted to see what they had in him. But despite losing him, though, the Colts managed to stay in contention, surprisingly, for both a playoff spot and the division until the very end. But like I said, they were just oh so close, but just not enough. They fell just well short in a Week 18 elimination game to the Texans. Just a dropped pass on 4th down by Gardner Minshew and his receiver, which was really rough to see. But the future's still bright for this team, nonetheless. Now that Anthony Richardson is in full control of this team, we're ready to see what he has with a full season, hopefully ahead of him. But yeah, it'll be interesting how that goes. So looking at the things that happened this past offseason and what they were going to do to prepare Anthony Richardson for the season that is to come, they mostly made some in-house moves, which is not a bad thing per se, because they extended guys like Michael Pittman Jr., DeForest Buckner, Zaire Franklin. They gave him that money. They kept them around for however long they are. And they also re-signed key players like edge rusher Tyquan Lewis, Kenny Moore at corner, linebacker Ronnie Harrison, and safety Julian Blackmon. Several key players on that defense, they're back in Indianapolis. So all those key guys, they're sticking around. And, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So clearly the goal is set for these Indianapolis Colts. They were close, very close at the end of last season, but now the goal is in sight. You got to try and earn a playoff berth, especially with your quarterback hopefully fully healthy, but you got to keep him healthy. So looking at some of the moves that the Colts made this past offseason, the other moves that they made, honestly, they didn't really do a lot, but at the same time, they didn't have to do a whole lot, if we're being honest, because they didn't lose any notable people other than Gardner Minshew, but then they ended up replacing him with Joe Flacco, who had a surprising late season stretch with the Browns. And then they also added Raekwon Davis from the Dolphins. So Davis could be a key rotational piece in their already solid defense. But when you look at the draft, that's when they did their dirty work, getting one of the top edge rushers in the draft class, like Latu from UCLA, and then getting another receiver for Anthony Richardson and Adonai Mitchell from Texas, and then getting him more protection, like Matthew Goncalves from Pittsburgh and Tahor Bartolini from Wisconsin. So looking at this Colts past offseason, Anthony Richardson, he has pretty much almost all the tools at his disposal. The protection up front is going to be a little bit better, if not more better than it was the previous year and the quarterbacks that preceded him. So when you look at it, the Colts did pretty much everything to improve this team and keep everyone around. So now it's going to be on Anthony Richardson to take a big leap that he was supposed to have last year. So Mitch, like when you look at the additions, like Adonai Mitchell, he has serious upside in a receiver room that's already loaded with Michael Pittman Jr., Alec Pierce, and Josh Downs. And then again, with the protection on offensive line, there's so much depth there. It's so stacked and skilled at every position. And then defensively, it's already a good defense. They just need to add a couple more pieces in there, and they're set. Especially in the pass rush, it's already pretty deadly over there. So it is going to be on Anthony Richardson to take the steps necessary that's supposed to take last year and hopefully be the quarterback that the Colts are looking for, why they drafted him. So looking at some of the key games for the Indianapolis Colts this season, it starts week 1 at home against the defending division champions, the Houston Texans, who in their right are going to be looking to down the Colts very early on in their game. So it should be a fun one in week 1. And then right after that, they go face Jordan Love and the Green Bay Packers in week 2. Another interesting contest there outside of the conference. And then week 5 and 6 is another interesting test for Anthony Richardson and the Colts. They go to Jacksonville to take on the Jaguars, and they go to Tennessee to take on the rebuilding Titans. So some early division tests in the first month of the season. So they can easily go 3-0, a surprising 3-0. They can do a split, or they can easily fall behind. So it's going to be interesting how these Colts go. So obviously my questions around this team surrounded around the quarterback, Anthony Richardson, because Anthony Richardson showed a lot of promise. He has a good arm. He's pretty smart with the football, but there's one thing that I cannot let him get away with, and that is his decision making on protecting himself. He is not good. He always is not good with protecting himself. He just, I guess it's his own instinct of letting himself be like Lamar Jackson. I'm just gonna run the football, or let himself be like Trey Lance. I'm just gonna go on these design runs or off the script runs, and then go from there. Even though he has a deep offensive line that's clearly gonna protect them, but damn, that's the reason why he got hurt, because he just lets himself be a punching bag for a lot of defenders. And I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, but when you get hurt, when you get concussed, and then you end up getting your shoulder hurt, that kicks you out for the rest of the season, it's not good for you. It's like it makes you think to other people that you're injury prone, which sucks. And I don't want that for him because he has a lot of potential. So I'm hoping that this coming season for Anthony Richardson, there's going to be less reliance of him running the football. I mean, there has to be a healthy balance to keep him from getting hurt. And I hope that Shane Steichen, the head coach, realizes that. Because that led to him getting hurt in every single game that he played. Because, you got to keep him away from injury, and that's going to be key to his development and keeping the team competitive all season long. So for the Colts, they're deep. They're a deep, underrated team that were just a quarterback away from making the playoffs last year. Gardner Minshew did fine for them. He did pretty solid for them, but it's just that one fourth down play that stopped things in their tracks. So who knows? Maybe they can make good on their promise this year, despite a tough slate to start the year. But a lot of that's going to depend on Anthony Richardson and whether he continues to progress well as the Colts' long-term quarterback. If he does, we could be looking at something pretty interesting down in this indie promotion with the Colts. Speaking of indie promotions, let's go down to the land of All Elite, the home of AEW, to talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars last year in 2023, they had the AFC South well in their grasp for much of the year. But then week 10 came around, they got their butts whooped by the 49ers. They win the next game, but then they pretty much lose every game after that. A sharp decline in play, not just from their quarterback, but the rest of the team. Speaking of the quarterback, Trevor Lawrence gets hurt, and he comes back suddenly the next game, but it's clear that his injury is significantly affecting his play, and he was incurring injuries left and right in almost every game that he played. He was pretty much forcing the issue on himself. As that and a lot of other things factored into a late season collapse, and they lost the division to the Houston Texans, and they missed the playoffs entirely. Sure, they finished the season 9-8, but it's a disappointing 9-8 because you pretty much had the division wrapped up, ready to go for a playoff run, and yet you let it slip out of your hands because of this. So obviously, if you're the Jacksonville Jaguars going into this year, you want to reclaim the division, but if you can't, you still want to at least make the playoffs and try and make a run, because you at least did that in 2022 with this kind of run, this kind of record, and you almost had the Kansas City Chiefs on their heels, but you just fell a little bit short. 2023 was an absolute disappointment. So you got to make up for that this coming year. So to try and get to that goal, there were some key things that happened this past offseason, like franchise tagging and then later re-signing Josh Allen, not the quarterback, the linebacker, to this big fat contract. So they give their top linebacker Josh Allen a big fat contract, but he's been performing well, so I feel like he's earned it. They also re-signed guard Urza Cleveland to a 3-year deal. I mean, probably one of the only solid linemen on the Jaguars' shaky offensive line. And then a slew of interesting moves happened with this all-elite team. First of all, they traded for quarterback Mac Jones from the Patriots in return for this year's 6th-round pick. And I get it. New England needed to ship off their former first-round pick. You know, the same first round pick that, you know, their certain number 1 overall pick, you know, the Jaguars was drafted in. But, you know, what was the need for it? What was the need for Mac Jones? Maybe an insurance policy? I don't know. But either way, it was a kind of interesting move that these Jaguars made, acquiring Mac Jones from the Patriots. But yeah, interesting stuff there. Speaking of this draft, that 2021 draft class, they gave their quarterback Trevor Lawrence a big fat 5-year contract extension, and I'm just thinking, okay, all right. I'm just hoping that he plays up to that potential, because last year was kind of a disappointment. 2022, okay, that was his best year, and obviously rookie year is rookie year, but we'll see if he can bounce back this year. And then we can have a conversation of whether or not he's deserving of it, earned it, especially when you bring in Mac Jones for some odd reason. Then you give Trevor Lawrence the contract extension. But at least you try to give him some help when we talk about these offseason moves, because the other offseason moves that happened with Lawrence and the gang, he lost his best receiver in Calvin Ridley. He is now residing in the other side of the division with the Tennessee Titans. And I'm just like, woof. But maybe not so woof, because maybe there's been reports that he had some character issues. So maybe that's why the Jaguars let him go. Interesting that about character issues, because, well, maybe Tony Khan infected him. I don't know. Either way, they also let go Darius Williams to the Rams. So that's a choice move that the Jaguars made by letting him go. They also let Rayshawn Jenkins go to the Seahawks. So they tried to replace them all with defensive tackle Eric Armstead, who was released by the 49ers just a couple days prior to the Jaguars signing him. More about Eric Armstead in a bit. They also got corner Ronald Darby and receiver Devin Duvernay from the Baltimore Ravens. So Duvernay being an addition to Trevor Lawrence's offense. So they also tried to replace Calvin Ridley with Gabe Davis from the Buffalo Bills. We'll see how that works. But they did upgrade their secondary a bit with Darnell Savage from the Green Bay Packers, and then Mitch Morse at the offensive line for from the Bills as well. So in the draft, the Jaguars selected Brian Thomas from LSU. He's a pretty good receiver for them. And then continuing to upgrade the offensive line is Javon Foster from Missouri, And then in the trenches on the opposite side is Jordan Jefferson from LSU. So when you look at all these moves that the Jaguars made this past offseason, my thing is, why didn't they do more to upgrade the offensive line? And I know there are guys like Javon Foster and Mitch Morse there, but I felt like they should have added some more people. The interior, especially last year, was a major weakness. I mean, I get it. There's a Cleveland. He has been a solid guard in his previous team, but when he came over from, I think it was the Vikings last year, he kind of disappointed. And then you had Brandon Sheriff. He's usually reliable, but the interior was kind of not good last year. It was a little lackluster. But the tackle spot wasn't any better either. Cam Robinson was solid, but he missed some time due to injury. And then Anton Harrison struggled in his rookie year. Maybe he'll bounce back. But yeah, that's pretty much the theme. There's at least room for improvement going into this season for all involved. But it's a little surprising that Trent Baalke didn't beef up the offensive line, because Trevor Lawrence's protection, that or the lack thereof, that's where the injuries piled up for him last season. I'm not sure why Trent Baalke wants a repeat of that. And then on the other side of the ball, the defense, at least before this critical move, I thought it was going to be better. Maybe it still could be better, but the Jaguars defense really struggled last year in both the pass rush and the secondary. The secondary should at least be a little bit better with their additions with Darnell Savage and maybe Ronald Darby if he could stay healthy, but we will see. But the pass rush, I thought was going to be better to try and help out Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen, and the linebacker, not the quarterback. But the news came out a couple of days ago that their defensive tackle, the one that I mentioned, Eric Armstead, yeah, he got put on the physically unable to perform list right before training camp. Yeah, that's not good for them. It's like, for as productive as Armstead was for the 49ers, my team, there's a reason why the Niners released him, because, for as productive as he was in the interior, especially on the run, like with the run defense, and then, sometimes he'll get to the quarterback as well. You just can't stay healthy. So it's clear that Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen are once again going to have to carry the load for this front seven. But at least the receiver, and on a positive note, the receiver position should be a little bit more stacked. Especially now that Calvin Ridley is gone from the Titans. Christian Kirk certainly was gonna needed some help had they not gotten the likes of Gabe Davis and then drafted Brian Thomas. So at least now he has some help that can help out Trevor Lawrence. So looking at some of the Jaguars' key games for this coming season, boy, they start with the gauntlet. The first month of the season is brutal for them. You go to Miami to take on Tua and the Dolphins. Then you host Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns in your home opener. Then you get a 2-week road trip. You're going back on the road, starting up Western New York to take on Josh Allen, the Bills. And then your first division game of the season against CJ Stroud and the Houston Texans in week 4. Yeah, these are games that the Jaguars absolutely have to win right out of the gate. And if they don't, they're screwed. So, with Trevor Lawrence, we know how good or bad, depending on your perception of him, we know how he can be. But my biggest criticism, my biggest critique of Trevor Lawrence is his turnovers. He can be a little turnover prone sometimes. Last year, he was more of that, which I'm not sure. Maybe it was with the injuries, but it was even before that. He was pretty turnover prone, which dug the Jaguars into these holes and eventually the losses that they suffered prior to Trevor Lawrence getting hurt. So hopefully, this past offseason, Lawrence was working on cutting back on this turnovers with this coaching staff, and he's going to protect the football more and just generally making better decisions with it. So the Jaguars, they majorly disappointed in 2023. And now that you have the Colts, especially the Texans, improving their rosters more than they have, it's going to be a challenge for them to try and compete in this division. But hey, what better way to try and make yourselves better than to compete with your division rivals? So speaking of compete, they'll still be in contention for the division. I mean, it's just going to be harder. They'll also still be in contention for a playoff spot because why not? It's the AFC. But they have several tough games, and that starts at the beginning of the season. So if a fully healthy Trevor Lawrence doesn't bounce back, then it's going to be another disappointment in the land of all elite of Duval County. So wrapping up part 6 of our 2024 NFL season preview month is the team that took many, including myself and the entire NFL last year by surprise. And that team goes by the name in H-Town, the Houston Texans. So 2023 was supposed to represent season 1 of the Houston Texans rebuild. But the Texans decided to press the fast forward button on the remote and speed run through their first year of their rebuild, and also upload that to speedrun.com and put it into the category of fastest rebuild in NFL history, because that's exactly what it felt like, because CJ Stroud looked like a veteran quarterback as each and every game progressed. As the season wore along, DeMeco Ryans was a really good head coach, and as the season progressed later on in the year, a lot of players stepped up in support of CJ Stroud, especially when it came to the field of play. As the Texans went 10-7, they won the AFC South division title, and they actually won a playoff game against the Cleveland Browns. Like, it was a big surprise at the time, and they actually made it as far as the divisional game. Sure, they lost to the top-seeded Baltimore Ravens, but the future was bright for them. Like, they were well ahead of schedule. They certainly have more than arrived, much earlier than expected. So there was nowhere else to go but up for these Texans. So how are they going to improve from this past year's surprising results? How much more higher can they go? Well, let's look at what they did to try to improve this past offseason. So they wanted to re-sign some of their key guys, like tight end Dalton Schultz, their kicker Kaimi Fairbairn, to long-term deals, and they went on the trade market. They traded for guys like running back Joe Mixon from the Bengals, the receiver Ben Skoranek from the Rams, but they also traded away defensive tackle Malik Collins to the 49ers. But perhaps the biggest move that they made this past offseason was for a receiver by the name of Stephon Diggs from the Buffalo Bills. So they gave away a second-round pick for him, but the key was getting another weapon for second-year quarterback CJ Stroud in a receiver room that's pretty much like already a little, I'd say, stacked by now, because they took a big step forward last year. But getting a veteran receiver in Diggs makes that even stronger, with like Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and now you have Stephon Diggs. That's a stacked receiver room right there. It's even more deadly. So this Texans team, they can probably reach that ultimate goal that should be for 2024, and that is reaching their first ever AFC Championship game. So it's still very early to say whether they'll do that or not, but that should be their goal for this year. So how do they achieve that goal? Well, let's look at some of their other offseason moves, starting with free agency. Now, when it comes to losing guys, honestly, they were easily replaceable. Like Devin Singletary, like I mentioned, he was already replaced by Joe Mixon. Edge rusher Jonathan Greenard and linebacker Blake Cashman, they moved on to the Vikings, but they ended up being replaced later on. And then defensive tackle Sheldon Rankins, he went to the Bengals, but he also got replaced later on. So in essence, these guys got replaced by likely better additions, like linebacker Azeez Al-Shaair from the Titans, very familiar with DeMeco Ryans already from their days with the 49ers. So if the scheme's the same for Al-Shaair, no problem fitting in. And then they also got edge rushers Danielle Hunter and Danico Autry from the Vikings and the Titans respectively. Better upgrade for that Houston Texans pass rush that kind of struggled at various points last year, especially when it got marred by injury. So that should be big help for Will Anderson in the front four. And then they also got defensive tackle Tim Settle from the Buffalo Bills. Again, another addition to that pass rush that kind of struggled at different points last year. So looking at the draft, they mostly focused on the defense, and that started with corner Kamari Lassiter from Georgia, and then safety Kalen Bullock from USC. But they also focused on the offensive line too. Blake Fisher from Notre Dame. So some of those key moves from the draft. And when you look at it for the Houston Texans this past offseason, it was really good for them. This is a really good offseason for them, because when you look at those moves defensively, like Danielle Hunter, Domenico Autry, and that front four now, they should be a much more opposing force. They should be able to better get at the quarterback, given that they stay healthy though. And then offensively, the protection that was a problem for CJ Stroud last year, it should be a lot better, especially considering that left tackle Laremy Tunsil was like the only guy that was very consistent last year. So he gets some much needed help with new addition, the rookie Blake Fisher, taking over Titus Howard's spot at right tackle. Titus Howard's going to move inside the line, whether it's at guard or at center. He'll take one of those guard spots. So it'll be interesting how this protection will hold up, but at least on paper, it should be better. So speaking of CJ Stroud, he should be able to take an even bigger step in year two. Like he already took a surprise leap in his rookie year, but I feel like he's gonna take an even bigger one with Stephon Diggs at one of the receiver spots. I mean, like I said, you already have Nico Collins, you already have Tank Dell, who unfortunately was lost very late in the season with a serious injury, but you add in all those three elements, this passing attack is going to be very dangerous. And don't forget Dalton Schultz in it as well. So that's like a four-headed dragon in the passing game. So Stephon Diggs, especially, who regressed in the back half of last year in Buffalo with I guess it had some of it had to do with the coordinator change from Ken Dorsey to Joe Brady, and maybe there was some dysfunction with him and Josh Allen. I don't know what it was with that regression, but either way, he's also seeking to bounce back now with this new change in scenery. And then the rushing attack should also be a little bit better with the addition of Joe Mixon, and don't forget, Dameon Pierce also has something to prove as well in the reserve role as well. So looking at some of the Texans' key games this season, you start on the road, taking on the Indianapolis Colts, so a very early division game right out of the gate, taking on Anthony Richardson, so something has to give, but for the Texans, if you're looking at them, they certainly not going to give that one away if you're looking at it from their point of view. Then you come home to take on the upstart Chicago Bears with Caleb Williams, so that should be an interesting matchup, like very early on in the season. And then weeks 4 to 5 should be an interesting test. You host the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Buffalo Bills back-to-back weeks. At least you're on home turf. And then much later down the season, where things could get really interesting, depending on where the Texans are, a date with the Kansas City Chiefs right before Christmas, the week before in Arrowhead. So who knows where both teams will be at by that point, whether it be for a top spot in the conference, seeding, who knows, maybe both teams are in contention for a division title, who knows. But either way, should be an interesting late season matchup for both of those teams. So obviously the biggest thing going for the Texans, my biggest question for them is, well, my expectation. Like I'm not sure what to expect for this second year of CJ Stroud and DeMeco Ryans, because they really surprised me last year with how much CJ Stroud developed like that fast in a hurry, and then how well coached they were. So you just have to wonder and hope that they're going to be even better this year, if not as good as the previous year. So, like I said, nowhere else to go but up. Hopefully they don't go down, because the Texans are really good. So for the Texans, they were the most unexpected team that arrived a year early into their rebuild. Like, I'm not kidding you. This is like, they're legit, because they improved their team this past offseason, like in what was supposed to be the second year of their rebuild, but all of a sudden they're a playoff contender now. And that, with that being said, it's not that crazy to believe or to say that the Texans have a high chance to win the AFC South again, but also they have a pretty good shot if things go right, as long as they play to their expectations, as long as they stay healthy. They can make it to their first ever AFC Championship game in January. I know it's very far away, but this team is so talented. They play very well. They're very well coached. But again, it's all going to come down to playing to expectations and playing consistently. But yeah, if they go their way, they can go the distance and make it to their first title game in January. And with that, that is a wrap on part 6 of our 2024 NFL season preview month. And in this episode, we covered the 4 teams that resided in the AFC South, those teams being the Houston Texans, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Indianapolis Colts, and the Tennessee Titans. If you're a fan of either of these teams, or you're someone on the outside looking in but have particular interest in one of these teams or all of these teams, let me know in the comments below on YouTube, or send me a message on social media at VeryColdLasagna, whether on Twitter or Instagram. Let me know your own takes on your expectations for 2024 for any of these teams, and we can have a conversation about it. With that being said, that is it for this episode of Very Cold Lasagna. And in the next episode, for the next season preview, we're going to be covering the AFC North and that competitive division this coming fall. But until then, thank you for tuning into episode number 208 of this icy yet spicy podcast known as Very Cold Lasagna. I am Ben, your host, DylanLasagna. Thank you for tuning in, and until the next one, keep that lasagna very cold in the fridge with your takes on the world of sports. But until the next one, peace out.